put all the energy and pressure on your governments to make sure that not only the package that the Open Working Group has come up with is taken forward, but further consolidated, further strengthened, and also other goals must reflect even more strongly the gender equality and women's empowerment agenda. And also the report of the Intergovernmental High-Level Committee on Sustainable Development, and of course, all of these we need to influence. So basically, what we are talking about is that we really need that between Beijing and the post-2015, we make that journey one that is normatively reinforcing, and then we push for its implementation and accountability at the regional, national, local, and community levels as well. And that journey also includes, of course, all other agreements and outcomes of the General Assembly, the Commission on Status of Women. I don't have the time to share with you all of that, but there is a very solid body of, in fact, there was a whole Commission on Status of Women on the theme of men and boys. So there is enough normative international reinforcement of your cause. Now you need to reinforce that into the future and make it accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmi. So we're at this moment in time. We have 20 years of normative frameworks, of institutionalized commitments to engaging men and boys. We have this opportunity in front of us that doesn't come around. It not once in a century. It's the second time it's maybe come around, ever, to influence that. And what we hear clearly as well is there's still an opportunity to do that. But before we look at some of those things, I maybe would like to invite Kate to the conversation. And we have some handheld mics here. And we don't need to get up. And now we're going to sit and chat amongst ourselves. And Kate, how far do you think we have come in terms of engaging men and boys? And maybe you could just give us a little reflection on that, and then we'll talk about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities ahead.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and my apologies for being late. Let me very briefly say that for me there are, in development's trajectory, there have been 5 key dates that are so essential to understanding the journey we need to still take with regards to engagement of men and boys. In 1993, the Vienna Conference on Human Rights said powerfully that indivisibility is essential to human rights. And it challenged the idea that civil and political rights are separate from economic, social, and cultural rights. And it began to notice the private sphere in which human rights also belong. In 1994, the Cairo Conference on Population and Development said human rights belong in the bedroom, that human rights are inherently about choice, personal autonomy, and they're about dignity, including in the most intimate of spaces. And then in 1994, the Beijing Conference said very powerfully, and human rights belong to women, and women's rights are human rights. Now, in that story from indivisibility through to human rights in intimate spaces belonging for women comes this development proposition that human rights are not just the end point of development, they are the means of development. Now, the minute you start talking about human rights and building on the intersections between those 3 key dates, you start to think about how can we take that forward into a purposeful program of action that would see human rights upheld. And there remains still this untapped resource, particularly for the advance of human rights in intimacy, human rights indivisible, and human rights for women, this untapped resource of the solidarity of men and boys. We've trialled it. We're now at a point where UNFPA, for example, is active in 80 countries with programs on the ground involving men and boys. And the evidence is very, very clear it works. It works. It makes a difference. And it is liberating for men and boys, incidentally, as well as women and girls. So I think that the culmination of that conversation is important. But then we therefore have now two other important dates to notice. One was 2000 and the MDGs, and the absence, I think, of taking full advantage of that solidarity over the course of those 15 years, even though we've achieved a lot. So it means this fifth date, 2015, is an opportunity to take advantage of all that learning, and now, as Lakshmi said so powerfully, is the time. But before I finish here, I just want to recall one more date. And this mobilised men and boys. And this was a men's movement. And this caused the engagement of men and boys in so many places across the world where we try to reach. And that date was 9/11. That date was 2001. That date, which led to the war on terror, and all that has opened up, and all the horror that accompanied that war on terror, that has been development's trajectory as well. And on the other side of it, we have on the one hand the Arab Spring and the yellow umbrellas in Hong Kong, which is a movement, incidentally, of men and women. And on the other hand, we have all that we've seen in the demise of the situation for so many people in Syria and running right down through the Middle East into the Central Africa Republic, right across that middle turning point of our geopolitical world. That is a movement of people as well. And we are in deep trouble if we cannot bring alive the normative discourse so that it is relevant and upheld and addressing that powerful movement of men and boys. And for me, that is the real challenge going forward.
Great. Thanks, Kate. We're going to have a conversation now, so there's handheld mics here at the tables. And the thing that I want to start with, Vandana, I want to go back to this notion of the feeling that women had in that room in Beijing. These feelings of trepidation, uncertainty, fear, apprehension, lots of questions. This is now what come to what we know in this work around engaging men and boys is the questions around accountability to women and to the women's movement. So I'll start with you. How have we done? Could we do better? What are your impressions so far?
Yes, there are lots of scopes where we can do better. We have been doing, but what we have been doing, as I said earlier, has not yielded the kind of impact that we would have desired. So I think we'll have to find ways, innovative ways of doing things in a different manner, and perhaps engaging men and boys, like I said earlier, as stakeholders. One of the few things that we've done in Nepal is to reach out to institutions which have outreach to larger numbers. For example, we are working with the sports sector. We are working with footballers, which is a very popular game in Nepal. And we have signed a memorandum of understanding with the Football Association where, this is a very rigid institution, as we know. Footballers are considered to be aggressive, use foul languages, mostly derogatory to women. So there was some resistance in terms of we penetrating into that institution. But with lots of efforts, we penetrated into that institution, and we now have a MOU. And this is a disciplined institution in terms of they have district associations in 50 of the 75 districts. So what gets accepted at the higher level gets penetrated quickly into the lower level. So with the footballers, we've been able to reach out to masses. In terms of what we have, what is the strength that we used is how do they benefit out of this? That's the biggest question, I think. That's the question that everyone asks. Am I going to lose something out of this? What is it in it for me as partnership? How do I benefit? How does my family benefit? How does my children benefit? Our community benefit? So that is the question that we really need to, expand and focus on in the coming years to make that partnership. And that's what exactly we did with the footballers. What is it that they benefit out of this? You know, the social responsibility aspect. The image, their own image was enhanced because of the kind of partnership that they had. So I think we need to reach out to institutions where they reach out in masses, you know, and not just limiting to numbers or projects or programs. And like I said, men themselves need to challenge the power dynamics in their own lives, in their own communities.
And that's what I'm curious about, and maybe Lakshmi or Greta, you can jump in on this. How have we done? I don't think that we've done great. I think there's more that we can do. And I want to come to Yoni in a second to talk about Men Engage's accountability toolkit that we're putting together. But I'd like to know, really, this is a space for critical reflection. How have we done, and what can we do better? And I don't want anybody to hold back.
Well, I think the very fact that you are having this conference and that we have a He for She campaign in UN Women is, first of all, a recognition of the criticality of the men and boys' engagement for achieving the gender equality and women's empowerment goal. And I'm now talking about the overall goal, not the SDGs per se. At the same time, we certainly assessed that this issue of men and boys' engagement in the gender equality project has been insufficient, and I'm not only blaming the women's movement for it, because they had their own reasons, their own preoccupations, their own challenges. And I think there has been some bridging of that binary that we have been referring to throughout this conference between feminism and not only masculinity, but the men engaged constituency. But it is also about not recognizing enough that in everything that we do, in everything that we do with and for and by gender equality and women's empowerment, we need to have men engaged, men involved, men responsible and accountable. And that's really what I think our executive director also pointed out. That's the game changer. And that's one of the key game changers. And that's why, and I must tell you, even in our organization, one of my colleagues, when we were just conceptualizing this He for She and we were about to launch it, and there was a message sent out by our executive director, one of our colleagues, an old-time feminist, came up to me and said, "I'm ashamed of this. This, reminds me of the time when as a child, my father, and she's an Austrian German, and she said, my father, who was a typical patriarch, whenever we had visitors and I was asked questions, he would answer for me. And this He for She sounds just like that." So it has to be, I think it's the terms of engagement that are critical.
Great.
The terms of engagement between the women's movement and the men's movement, if I may call it. I call it mainstreaming of gender equality. We keep talking about gender mainstreaming, but actually mainstreaming of our work. So I think the important thing now, it's really a turning point. Why we are talking about this normative framework, we have to link it to the global solidarity movement involving both women and men.
Right.
The joining up. That's the really big opportunity. And from the top to the bottom, and from grassroots upwards. So that's, I think, something that I hope this conference will send out electricity around the world and really bring about the joining of the women's movement, and which itself is, at a turning point in so many ways, and this men's movement.
Great. And Ambassador, I wonder if you could build on this, because to me also, accountability is inseparable from the resource question, the same kind of question that Michael Kimmel brought up this morning about how do we do this work, without compromising the pie that's already too limited for the work that needs to be done? How do we have these equitable conversations about resource allocation? How do we strive to build a bigger pie in a world where we're running out of resources to make that pie happen?
I think I come back to this being a human rights issue. I mean, really, because talking about the pie is always better when people have a better life. I mean, and the more have a better life, the better the pie is. I mean, it's not about, it's always going to be more competition. If women really, if there will be gender equality, there will be more competition. And that is something that all of us have to live with. And not only men, I mean, everybody. And so I really think, and I just want to revert a little bit to what you asked Lakshmi, because where we are at and so on, because I think we have, and these kind of meetings, I think, were not taking place, 15 years ago and so on. I mean, I think there is, seeing all these movements now at the grassroots that are really working on this issue to engage men and boys, it's fantastic. But I think really where we need to see more change is at the government level in leadership, and that is where we have a real deficit when it comes to women representation. And being at the UN, I mean, we can look at when we have summits or the ministerial debate, the ratio between men and women. When we look at the ambassadors at the UN, there are 195 really, and 34 are women. And so we need to engage the top level. And there are challenges there because I think we see a lot of progress when it comes to addressing these issues when we are talking about women as victims, but less so when we talk about women as participants. And that is really where we need more engagement from men and boys. And I just want to use this opportunity, because I couldn't do it up there, because Iceland and Suriname, my colleague from Suriname is here in the audience, we are going to have a conference in January called the Barbershop, and that will focus on the role of men when it comes to preventing and eliminating violence against women. But we are very much targeting our own colleagues through that conference. I mean, to engage our own colleagues in this discussion. So, and with He4C, UN Women is really doing a terrific job. I mean, because you have to start somewhere, and already the progress is great.
Fantastic. So I wonder if we could pass it back to Yoni here. I want to ask her to just reflect a little bit on accountability and for the conversations that we have within this movement of engaging men and boys. We've come to, I think, consensus around saying these need to be institutionalized. We need to set some boundaries and guidelines and frameworks around what accountability looks like and what it means. So maybe you could just share a couple points on that, and then I want to shift us a little bit to solutions and how we can input on what's next.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, obviously accountability is a huge issue in the debate, and it has been, as I understand now, for a long time. And it's something that as Men Engage, as a global alliance of organizations working with men and boys on gender justice, are of course also asking ourselves. So we developed a toolkit, and it's only kind of soft launched, it was here. So it offers some guidelines for member organizations and others as well on how you can kind of hold each other accountable as partner organizations, how you can have a dialogue with each other about what accountability is, but also how you can deal with it at the moment that you actually hear, for example, that there's a men's rights group who is saying things that are not in line with gender equality, that are not aligned with feminist language, that are not about women's human rights. And So yeah, how can you then actually, because I spoke before about men standing up and showing leadership and holding other men accountable, so it provides some of the tools to talk as male leaders, talk to other men about how to do it right. I just want to share that since I have this feeling that there is like quite a large consensus about the fact that working with men and boys is a game changer. It's like the next step. So that makes me wonder that when we had 11 targets, in the Sustainable Development Goal, yes, number 5, and there's 11 targets, and then the one on engaging men and boys was actually taken out because the agenda got too long. I mean, if we're seeing that this is half of the solution, then I really, really urge everyone, and I do want to thank also the government of Iceland, UN Women, UNFPA for already putting it in there. But I think that we can do a lot more on making sure that it gets back in. And I mean, we have a lot of ideas on how to make it measurable. I wrote them all down. I won't do it now, but yes.
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to indicators in a second. I just want to. I want to take a moment here to urge us all when we're talking about, and we've talked about it in a few places, this so-called men's rights groups. They're not about rights. They're about men's power. So let's change the narrative here at this place and people that are dealing with them. They're not rights groups, first of all. So one thing that also has seemed to have really struck a chord in the past less than 24 hours, it can hardly seem like that, was Rahul Bose's comment last night that we have to engage men and boys, but we have to do it the right way. And I've heard people for the last not even 24 hours really be moved by that sentiment. My fear is, what is the right way? Let's put some parameters around that. And Kate, I wonder if you could maybe kick it off and just help us. How are we going to define the right way? Because it all seems intuitive to us, but that's not sufficient.
And it's a great thing that the UN is present in the conversation. And, it's invaluable, I think, to activists, no doubt, to have the normative language that emerges out of UN debate, even though I should stress a lot of it is limited compared to our own aspirations. But do you know how small the UN's budget is? How little is the budget of ODA compared to the money invested in militarisation of the true discourse of men and boys engagement? And I want deeply to appreciate our discussion of programs and of policies and of standards. It's essential. But I hope we can keep at the back of our minds at the canvas of men's and boys' engagement that's already afoot. It's not that men and boys are not engaged. They are engaged. Oh boy, are they engaged. And you only need to look at the millions of young men that have been mobilised to armed conflict under the last 15 years, the same time we've aspired to the Millennium Development Goals. We've probably seen as much mobilisation of men and boys to armed conflict as we've seen during the period of the Great Wars. But we don't consider that men and boys engagement. But let us be very clear, of course, that it's men and boys engagement for the wrong reason, in the wrong way, with the awful result. So we have to hold very preciously that this is a conversation about scale, not programs. This is a conversation about positive deviation from a norm. It's not remedial intervention. This is a conversation that says to us, can we infect the world with a new aspiration for the relationship men and women? Rather than developing, although we need it, new data and new programs and new interventions? And the answer has to be yes. Look, 7,000 communities have abandoned FGM under the life course of the MDGs because men and boys were engaged. 11,000 husbands in Niger have stood up after a school, the L'École de Marie, and said, we can be better men in our relationships. Across Cambodia, there's a powerful discussion about what does it mean to be a good man. Men and boys are there to be engaged, and we have to engage them for the right reasons. So, for me, every time I hear he for she, I feel excited because I think there's more in the sentence. He for she, with her and she, through me and you, for them and us. And it's when we arrive at the them and us that we'll really be in a powerful point. But the destination is not the departure point. The destination is them and us. And on to we, away from he and she.
Great.